Hello there. I wanted to show you one way that you could use to do ecological networks. And this is something like a food web. And it's part of a main part of your assignments to figure out the interaction relationship between organisms in a particular community. So I got my data, all my lists, from my own observations, and then I zoomed in. You can kind of see here, this is a big zoom in on one community in the lower Arroyo. The little square there with the dots, I zoomed in on iNaturalist to get essentially what is that sage scrub area. And so all the lists and things I get and observations are from that. Anyway, so then on these small bits of paper down here, these are just little Post-its, and I write down groups of plants or animals on them kind of according to what they do. Now, when you first get your list, you may not know, oh, what does this animal do? So basically, while I'm kind of looking through the list and making it, I go ahead and Google the ones I don't know. So if there's some species I don't know what it eats or whatever, then I just Google it really quick, check the Wikipedia page, and see what it does. So I start off with a series of producers. And I put them into three categories here just because that's how they came out. I have lichens, which is an interesting sort of fungus algal symbiont. Trees, obviously you know what trees are, and I listed all the trees there. And then flowering plants, the small things like sages and penstemon and monkey flowers and stuff, and they're all kind of in one thing. And I separate them kind of like this because I think of them as guilds or groups of organisms that share a common function in the ecosystem. So flowering plants all have flowers, so they're going to use pollinators, they're going to have fruits, they're going to do similar things. Trees all have large trunks and invest in canopies and often have nuts and things like that. So they form these groups naturally. Then I put in the organisms that eat the plants in some way or another. And I kind of group them by, what they eat generally. So in these are ants, snails, and slugs. And I kind of put those separate. I wasn't quite sure. The harvester ants eat mostly seeds. Butterflies, when they're caterpillars, eat plants. But the butterflies themselves are pollinators. And then there's honeybees, which eat pollen directly and nectar from the plant, and they're also pollinators. And then there's a group of organisms that eat plants like ground squirrels, gophers, moles. There's a Jerusalem cricket there. And these guys eat the plants more directly. So if I'm kind of playing around with this, all of these guys, sort of come together to eat these organisms, huh? So if I'm making my network, I have that happening. But also, I might note if this is sort of predation, then I also have a sort of symbiotic relationship with these two guys especially, and flowering plants for pollination. So that's a different relationship, but nonetheless still part of the network. And then beyond that, there are things that eat these guys. So I have like spiders, for example, which eat insects. There's a whole collection of insect-eating birds, which is like a guild of birds that all eat insects. So kingbirds, wrens, mockingbirds, and towhees are all on that list. Dragonflies and lizards are also insect predators. So really this whole group here is a bunch of different insect predators. And so I would kind of, put these guys kind of all in this group. They're eating. They all eat these guys. And then there are animals that eat sort of the larger versions of this. And this would be including things like the bobcat, the fox, red-tailed hawks, and red-shouldered hawks. So these are all the big predatory birds. There are some things that are a little more omnivorous. Raccoons, for instance, and coyotes are more omnivorous. So the bobcat pretty much eats these little mammals here, mostly. The fox kind of eats this way, but also is kind of a bit of an omnivore. So we'll kind of make an omnivore path here, which would include some of these guys. But then also, coyotes will eat small mammals. And let's see, we'll put in the raccoon, which also eats small animals. So all of the blue lines in this case are all predation, or one eating another. There are also some little unusual bits. For instance, the fox squirrel, eats nuts from the trees specifically. The acorn woodpecker also eats nuts from the trees. And then finally, there are some decomposers like the mushrooms, and there are some insects like the darkling beetle, which sort of decompose, mostly in this case, plant material. We talked a little earlier, I put in this pollination thing. The fox squirrel and the acorn woodpecker also sort of live in this tree. And so in that case, we can say that, we can just put live, or, you could think of this as a different type of relationship other than predation. And that's probably true of many of these things. All of these other relationships, you could add things like, not only do these butterflies, and caterpillars eat the plants, but they also live on the plants as well, right? And so that's also true. Anyways, you could also do that with some of these birds here. You don't want to get too complicated, but you could zip through a little line to the plants from them, because the birds nest in these plants and trees. So let's zoom that over there. So now I've got kind of a crazy network diagram that shows some of the relationships between the plants and animals, but in groups, not necessarily all individuals, but some of them by these sort of guilds, like the insect-eating birds or flowering plants. Anyways, that's just one way to organize your network. The idea would be to be able to communicate this and then show it, comparing the different communities, both the communities within a site, like the sage scrub versus the oak forest, but then also when we get to the other field site, to compare the different types within that. So anyways, that's how you kind of get started doing this. I hope that helps.